The enemy of achieving something is not starting. This show's been a great intentional example of what it means if you value starting over perfection. Conquer that beast of wanting to be perfect and make a start. Allow yourself to be vulnerable, put yourself out there, and then also allow yourself to become better over time and allow yourself to win. Start practicing this experience of winning and excelling that and moving that into other areas of life. Hey everybody, Jeff here. Before we get started, if you're getting value from the podcast, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those of you listening on podcast apps, don't forget to rate and review. Your support really helps the show reach more people, and for that, I am truly grateful. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Point with Jeff Spikes, the show about achieving goals, embracing growth, and finding your true path. And now, here's your host, Jeff Spikes.
Hello and welcome to The Point. This is your host, Jeff Spikes, and welcome to episode 100. We are here. What an amazing journey it's been. The value of what has been delivered in 100 episodes has been really beneficial over the last few years. It's been a great demonstration where you can visually go back and look at the value of starting, and you can look at the value of consistency, and you can decide for yourself what those values are just based on seeing it and hearing it and believing it for you. This assignment has been taken on by people in coaching programs where we're helping people design messaging and use technology to move forward in the world with different ways of communicating. Here's the bottom line for this, right? Episode 100, we're going to dig right into this idea of strengths. We're going to talk about CliftonStrengths. And we're going to talk about moving towards goals, moving towards something you want on any level. It can be as simple as something in a daily routine or something as massive as a life dream or goal. So it's about moving forward towards something. Now, there is also the motivation we've talked about of also understanding what you're changing from or what you'd like to not experience or not have anymore or ever. And that is definitely part of motivation. Gratitude plays an entirely huge role in that probably you're not hearing enough about, right? Gratitude is an endless resource and energy. It's an endless energy. There's no end to how much energy can come from experiencing and living in a place of deep gratitude. And it's maybe, possibly, considering how limitless it is, one of the most underutilized. If you go back and look at episode 1, 2, or 3, look at the first few episodes, look at the quality, look at the way that the posting is that goes with it, the captions, how is the show being talked about? Is there an index that shows you at what point in the show that different things are being discussed? Like all of these details, and then look at the most recent episodes. Look at the clips that are on social media for those. YouTube's probably the best place to do that. It's really a major impact and a major thing that we talk about quite a bit that is really important for you to consider is making sure you're starting whatever it is. Once you have your goal, how do you start and move towards that? Because the enemy of achieving something is not starting. And it is wrapped up in the idea of perfection and making sure that everything's just right. This show's been a great intentional example of what it means if you value starting over perfection. We conquer that beast of wanting to be perfect and make a start. Allow yourself to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. And then also allow yourself to become better over time and allow yourself to win. Start practicing this experience of winning and excelling that and moving that into other areas of life. So episode 100, we're going to talk a lot about CliftonStrengths. We're going to talk a lot about the energy of gratitude, but really honing in on Clifton Strengths is critical. It's important today because you've given feedback on your perception of assessments. With all the feedback that's come in, and this has come in from the show, this has also come in from different seminars and companies that taken people through the strengths assessment, and also people that have gone through the designing strengths and looked at the organic approach of what's great about you, and looked at the scientific approach about what's great about you, to generalize it into three categories. There's three different types of experiences that come that you may have. So if you have never done the assessment, there are three different experiences. And you fit into one of these categories loosely. You may create a fourth category all of your own, and that would definitely say something about who you are. But for the sense of conversation, been grouped into these three columns. And the first one is if you're someone who has totally taken the Clifton Strengths assessment and say, man, this is totally me. It nailed it. It's 100% on the money. It's who I am. And it's so clearly who I am. It almost freaks me out. That's one. Two is well, I'm going to go three. Three is don't like it. Not even who I am. And maybe it says who I am a little, but it's just not. I don't like being pigeonholed. It's not quite accurate. I've taken it before and it changes. I tend to not like assessments anyway. If that's you, that's the third category. The second category is the one in the middle. This is like me, but there's a few things that don't quite fit, but it's pretty close. It's, a couple of these are right on the money. I think one of these, I'm not sure why one was lower than the other. That doesn't really make sense to me. Out of those three categories, one of the things that we've noticed is that the immediate person who appears to have the most gain is that number two. And I'm going to share with you right now. Think about this for yourself if you're walking into this. At what point of a process do you find that you doubt or don't like something? Is it typically in the beginning when you're seeing something? Is it when you're considering something up front and thinking about going into it? Or is it down the road afterwards that you start to consider something doesn't quite work, or somewhere in the middle? It might actually match your response to how this particular assessment is. So there's a couple of key things that you get to think about. So if you're in one of those zones and there's a natural way that you tend to show up, that could be also relative to how you experience this. But either way, there's no response that's wrong to have unless you fabricate one, unless you're inauthentic. It's a lot like writing and the formulating of a story when you're writing. There's no improper response to something that's been written, and there's no improper start or thought or idea that can't be written. It's about beginning to write and get things down. So I'm going to check. Let me look at my notes. Let's just check notes really quick. Think of who you are and how you tend to consider these assessments. Really important for this particular assessment. The third person that is resistant and doesn't really like the assessments and feels like you're being pigeonholed. One thing is really important for you to ask yourself is, are you clear on the assessment that you're taking? Are you clear, or are you lumping some of them together? Because Clifton Strengths specifically has a few things that are really epic about it. And one of them is that there's 70 years of science behind it. It's never meant to pigeonhole. It's meant to create a common language for many people to have a conversation and actually be able to move forward in that and with clarity. So the idea of part of the science delivers is a common language to increase the possibility and the actual reality of clarity, so that as you're having discussions with others about what makes you great, what makes you unique, special, that you're able to have that conversation with clarity. The other thing is that the science has proven that, just based on the idea that it's 1 to 1.33 million chance that you have the same top 5 in the same order. So it says that you are greater, that you are more unique than 1 in a million. How does that is clearly not pigeonholing anybody. The results don't make up who you are. It's not, and this isn't personality. This isn't This isn't an emotional assessment, a values assessment. It is clearly, and it's not an identity. It's not an assessment to discern what your identity is. It's really just an assessment about your strengths in how you move towards a goal. So if you're wanting to get something done, if you're wanting to succeed at something, you have specific tendencies of how you would naturally move forward that change depending on the situation and whatever it is that you're facing, but is really unique to you based on how you're going to move forward. So it puts it into 34 themes, and those theme names end up then housing a whole host of potential talents, potential things that you do or that you could consider doing to become more skillful in those talents that are within those themes. So it's really just a way of putting things together. All of that means really nothing other than it's non-threatening, because it's not about your identity or your personality or anything else. It is about awareness. It is giving you a framework to discuss how it is that you move forward. And if there's things that you agree with that you totally can move forward with, and or that you can see that it is similar to what you do, then you can connect to that. Or if it's something you don't, you can choose not to connect to it. Back to this idea of the three types of people. So if you're the type of person, regardless of which person you are, you have the opportunity to gain from this information. That's key. You will gain even more if you consider this within a group, because the group can then quickly get on the same page with how to move forward using the best of everybody. Another key thing is that if the best of you is being overutilized and you're not holding that sacred enough, it'll be very easy to begin to see, very simple, what it is that you're using so much of that you're finding more of a weakness. It might be getting in your way more than it's helping you. It's not uncommon to notice that something that could be the most an amazing, powerful skill or strategy or tactic that you use at trying to approach accomplishing something is just absolutely becoming more of a problem than good, and you to the point where you might even be considering it as a weakness or something bad that needs to be put away. Now, I've shared my story a lot of places. You may have heard it, but the simplest version of it is when I first took the assessment, I didn't like it. I didn't connect to it. My strengths, I looked at it and I thought, well, those aren't any good, because I had gone into the service and I had utilized the process of boot camp and being in the service to learn discipline and focus. So I took a disciplined and focused approach to improving discipline and focus. And I put myself in a very disciplined and focused environment to indoctrinate me into that, as if I were going into some type of intensive reprogramming therapy to learn something new. 5, 8, 9, 10 years later, as that was my strategy for succeeding, I learned about this assessment and I took this assessment, and my strengths were not discipline and focus. As a matter of fact, discipline and focus were down in 33 and 34. I found a way to make that work for me. What I learned, though, is that I wasn't comfortable doing it, because the way I was doing it just wasn't comfortable. When I realigned some of the ways I was going about doing it and started showing up through my top strengths, which are belief, command, woo, self-assurance, and strategic. And then number 6 for me is input. And I could go on. It's but the point and the idea of this is that as I started to move forward and consider what discipline looked like from those filters of those strength themes and the talents within those themes, my level of discipline and focus actually increased, even over what I had done by forcing myself to learn it. So my level of discipline and focus improved, and I was not as miserable or uncomfortable as I had been moving forward, trying to just fix discipline and focus. Then it actually became a weakness, because while I was performing the act of being disciplined and focused, if you spoke to me or interrupted me, I would just typically just not be very nice, because my way of doing it was to speak to myself like a drill instructor, to force myself to be disciplined and focused. So I came through a filter or a strategy of discipline and focus. What I know about this is that in working with people who are very highly gifted in the ability of discipline and focus, is that there's no problem with them talking to themselves however they need to be disciplined and focused. It's very natural that it happens. They don't turn around and snap at other people or be mean to other people or speak to other people like a drill instructor, because they're naturally able to be in that zone. Whereas for me, deploying this gaining a belief as to the importance of what it is I'm being disciplined with or that I'm being focused on, having a command with myself and this self-assurance about how that's true, and using strategy and even woo and winning myself and others over to the idea, it was much simpler and easier. And I actually looked more disciplined than I did previous. And when people interrupted me, I was kind. I was happy. I was joyous. Didn't have an issue with being interrupted. May that stand as a way of thinking about it for yourself if you're there. Now, however, if you're thinking about being pigeonholed, I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to really consider what it is to be pigeonholed, and I want you to think about if you think assessments are trying to put you in a box, it might be the way someone else is using it, or it might be the way you're understanding it's meant to be used, and that is, at least for this particular assessment, that's not how it's designed. It's designed to help you gain awareness and then consider ways of moving forward that might be simpler and easier for you. There's some differences. The studies show that most people don't change. The majority of people, when they retake the assessment, it doesn't change for them. But there's also a group of people that take it and it does change when they do it. And that usually says something about who you are. And you can then usually look at your results and find why that might be and have it begin to make sense. But either way, if that's true, you don't have to lose gifts that this report gives, because in the language that it provides in the results, out of that comes all kinds of really amazing information that would lend to helping you quickly write a bio, quickly understand how to introduce yourself to a new team, and help them understand more about who you are quickly. It's just, again, the entire process puts you in a place of being able to language what it is best about you that other people will then understand. Now, if a group takes the entire assessment together, now you have even more gains, because each person can begin to understand and frame what these things mean. I think I stepped away from the topic of thinking about the three types of people, the three types of most common responses. And I'm going to say the gains come differently for each person. So if you are the type of person that is in the middle ground, where some of the themes that came up in your assessment were right on the money and some weren't. You weren't sure why. Maybe you thought something further down in the report to you makes sense for it to be higher. You're the one that gets some of the most immediate gains from the assessment, because you're able to make those considerations quickly, right? You're already in a curious place now of considering what might be happening differently if you were to try something. So the questions that come up with something that doesn't quite fit is, well, what if it were, right? And then you get to experiment with that and play around. Like, what if that were number 3, even though or even number 1, and I don't quite think it fits? Because number 2 and 3 and 4 were just right on, So that's one way to go about it. The other way to go about it is to say, what is it I mean about these things that maybe I'm thinking of it differently than what the actual science, how they framed it in the meaning of a strength versus a dictionary meaning of a word, and how does that change my opinion of how this shows up? So those things can happen, but through that discovery, you can actually have some really immediate gains of considerations of trying different things. If you're the person that completely gets it and just sees it and is like, man, this is absolutely me, you also have some immediate gains, but there's also the potential that you have a slower roll with some of the gains you might actually have. The biggest gains you might have right away are awarenesses around, oh my gosh, this is why I'm not getting anywhere and why people are criticizing me and not connecting because I keep pushing something at the wrong time or the wrong way because it has to come out of me. And you might actually get in touch with something that you didn't know you were being more selfish about than giving because you weren't considering what's sacred about you is sacred. What was really special about you is special. And you were putting it out in every circumstance rather than holding it back and waiting. So, and for the right time. For example, if you're very empathetic and empathy is one of your strengths in that in the CliftonStrengths structure of that with someone who's very driven and more of an achiever and a maximizer, you're very different from that in that you're more based on wanting harmony and you're very empathetic and you're understanding maybe consistency and how things relate to each other. So you're connecting a lot of dots. And when someone's go, go, go and in their mode, it's not the best time to stop and feel and consider a lot of things because they're in go mode. However, it's highly valuable. Now, this was actually a gain that was made recently with someone that was working with their spouse, and there was always a frustration and there's always a little bit of a problem between in this coupleship that was just an issue where stop, don't, I got to keep moving and get this done. And I don't have time for all of that, so to speak. Well, when it was time for that person to slow down, we found this beautiful moment where it was most valued and when it was most valued and why they were in love with each other to begin with. And when they realized the strength of each individual, and they then allowed each other the space to do their strengths, to do what they did best. And then they valued and leaned on each other for them. Each person felt equally valued, and neither person felt like they had to keep stepping in to change the way something was. And there was an immediate gain of unity and connection and togetherness and an immediate increase of value, which otherwise previously had been an irritation and a problem almost driving them to separate and they were having difficulty moving forward. They had already separated energetically in how they were approaching situations in their family where they needed to be united. And that brought them together and helped them move forward in a much more powerful way and was an immediate gain. So those are a couple ways that you gain immediate gains through what you're doing. However, in that place where you totally relate, you might be in a position of I totally relate and I'm winning and I'm gaining a ton of ground. So why change anything? And that can take a little longer to see the gains. Sometimes that's just, you might be the person that just gets this affirmation, says, oh my gosh, that really is who I am. And that's awesome because I'm winning. That's how I'm winning. It'll be wonderful to have that experience and understanding. And when you stumble across something where you get tight and something's not quite working, you're not getting the real result that you wish you would have, to use that then as a filter to say, okay, if I'm so good at something all the time and I've no need to ever hold it back or contain it, then I don't really need to know, you don't really need to know at that point what the nuances are of how to be most effective in other areas. Then if you have a moment where you realize that, boy, I'm not getting the same experience here in a relational space or here where I need to influence a certain group of people, but it doesn't matter. Other people can do that. I just need to keep going. That's great if you can cover that and resolve that with others. But at some point, if you ever find the need to connect into a group that you're not connecting to, that's where the strengths come back into play. And that's why you might have a delay time between the time that you take the assessment and have some immediate gains and when it actually truly benefits you on a deeper level and has you solve a problem that you thought was unsolvable and had decided not to even worry about anymore. This is not a science of who you are in a moment. This is a science of how you move towards getting things done. And you might not have it might not interrupt you or have any challenge to you until a certain point of change or a certain point of growth towards what you're trying to achieve, at which point it then becomes more valuable. So that's the other. Who are you in this scenario? Who are you? Imagine yourself and how you connect to these things and where you might find the gains of these things. And imagine, what if you were trying to fix something that were broken, and that it wasn't broken, because in this structure, all 34 themes are strengths. It is not an identity assessment. It is not a personality assessment. As a matter of fact, it's the least threatening assessment that I have ever found and that I believe exists out there. It is the least threatening because you get to choose to attach it to your identity, and you get to choose how it fits within your identity. Whereas there's other psychological assessments and other work type of assessments that are given that, so there's even some assessments that recruiters and companies will use to determine how well you fit within a team. It's nothing like that. As a matter of fact, it's recommended not to use this in that way, because this doesn't say that with these strengths you should then do X, Y, or Z. It says, knowing your strengths, you could be anything you want to and get and achieve anything that you put your mind to, if you go at it from a path of considering what you're of working within your strengths and what you're best at, versus trying to work in areas that you're not best at. The odd dichotomy of that, the weird thing that kind of twists us up in that, is that oftentimes your weaknesses might be found in the greatest part of yourself that you're just using at a time and a place in a way that it isn't most beneficial, where you're not getting the most result or the most gain towards what you're trying to achieve. Back to this, the person that feels like they're being pigeonholed, that's another one that has an opportunity to make huge growth. And it's really kind of a surprise as to when that will happen. That usually happens after you've taken a minute to check yourself with what you're really believing and thinking about the process, and at least learning enough and understanding what it is that you're involved in or taking, or and what the information is that you're looking at. And if you believe it pigeonholes you, why are you choosing to allow it to pigeonhole you? And if you believe the assessment is inaccurate, why? So for me, it was important to wait. Somebody said, well, discipline and focus might be I had only taken the top 5. The top 5 were only given to me after taking the assessment. And somebody that had enough influence and that I respected enough said, well, let's just say that you could pay to get the rest of the results and get all 34. But so either do that and then we'll sort through that, or let's just agree that discipline and focus are probably in your top 10, and then let's keep moving. And that helped me to just go ahead and consider what number the top 5 did for me if I were to use them. But it was a slower connection time when it became really useful and like something clicked and I had aha moments. So it was a slower time frame. Interesting of that, if you're in that situation, if you choose to move forward with the assessment, it's really important to remember that all 34 of these things are strengths. So even if your top 5 doesn't quite fit you, if you get all 34, doesn't mean none of them are weaknesses. They're all strengths. One of the challenges that we have, that you may have, is that if you're living within a critical mindset, then that could be standing in your way. Now, there's a chart that we've shared in the past that shows that if in a performance indicator that shows what your performance is at reaching a goal, and you can use something like shooting a basketball or hitting baseball, so you can use a sports type of analogy if you want, or any other type of physical measurable thing that you can see the results of, maybe a stitch pattern that in a perfection, how well that stitch pattern is repeated. You could use anything to grade, so to speak, what this looks like. So if you're using a physical item to measure performance, you can do that, and you can say, okay, there's a 30% to a 70% effectiveness ratio, and 70% of the time it's perfect. It's exactly what it needs to be, but then it's not working this much of the time. So you can put it, you end up can have a range, and if you have a range of how something's working and you move the bottom line up, if you focus on what's not working and you want to correct those issues that aren't working, what happens is that you narrow the gap and you end up with a 70% to a 50% accuracy ratio. You're still not improving that 70%. So let's say that you can still make a few points higher and it goes up to 72 or 73%. That's what's been proven, is that it just narrows your range. Whereas if you focus on what's working really well, that's at 70%, and work on increasing that to 75, 80, 85, 90, and you can improve on that what's working well. And how could we get more of that? Then naturally, and you can even do the math on it, if it's a standard process, it comes up. So if you look at it from a physical process that's not a mechanical process that makes it obvious mathematically, and there's still a human error in it. If you focus on what's working really well every time you do it really well and continue to build on that, the bottom's naturally going to come up, and what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a higher ratio. So you're going to go to being 90% to 50%. So now you're seeing a much more impactful improvement. One of the areas that you may also think about this is an environment where you're working really hard and it's really difficult, and anything that's physically exhaustive at the end of the day. And there's this concept that says sometimes the difference between good and great is whether or not you clean up after yourself as you go, or taking the minutes where you might rest and actually still doing something that's just not as difficult or challenging. So back in Starbucks days, working behind the line at a Starbucks, you could work. It's really hard work to handle a rush. It was then, and it probably still is now, but back then it was a lot of work to handle a rush and get people's drinks out and do it all very quickly. And it was really tempting just to stop and talk and connect and do absolutely nothing at all when you had a minute to breathe. Well, what we learned is that if you took that time when you're taking a minute to breathe and bend down and wipe down the counter faces or the cupboard faces and wipe down the sides of the trash cans or wipe a wall where you sprayed things, you weren't any less tired at the end of the day or at the end of the week, but you were more energized as time went on because your environment stayed crisp and clean and awesome, and it wasn't as difficult or challenging to clean it later. When it came time to be graded by others and the environment stayed crisp and your scorings were higher and the experiences with clients were higher and everyone working there was happier, and there was this momentum that would be built that would lead to growth, encouragement, satisfaction at work, and all these things. So that makes sense. Well, that's focusing on what's working best, right? Which is staying energized and doing that work. And no one was any more exhausted at the end of the day than they would have been if they took breaks. It was tested. Now, some people have said in that environment, well, aren't you fixing what's broken because you're cleaning something that is dirty? And it's like, well, no, because it's meant to get dirty and it's meant to be cleaned. You can frame that however you choose. It's still maximizing the ability to focus on what's working and what is right, and that is keeping it clean. So you're focusing on the ultimate effort that you want. So either way, by doing this, it went up. When you focus on what's not working and all you're doing, if you think of it from the place of fixing something, then you're constantly, the measurement and the whole energy of it was different, and it actually got worse because that's all you could ever think about. There was nothing to improve on. There was nothing. It was just, oh my gosh, this is always dirty. This is always gross. This is always grimy. This is always a problem. People are coming in, and I don't know how anyone really gets this done. So that's the experience that was had with that, with that measurement. Whatever environment you're working in, if you focus on what's actually working and then maximize that, you are going to have a better impact overall of improving things than other. If you're the person that's the naysayer or that doesn't want to be put in a peg, I'm gonna end this for you and with you on this note. This science has proven that you are more unique than 1 in a million. And that means everyone is more unique than one in a million. The importance is that you start moving towards something you want. You have a clear picture of of what you don't. The more time you're spending focused on what you do want, man, the happier life can be. As you accentuate and improve on and build and grow and continue to focus on what is working well, you will continue to grow and improve. And that doesn't put you in a peg. It actually allows you to be that unique individual person that you are. That is the point of episode 100. And no matter what your experience is with understanding what your strengths are, you can find the best way to move forward to your sense of giftedness. And that's the point with Jeff Spike. Peace out. Love all.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of The Point with me, Jeff Spikes. Please visit jeffspikes.com for everything you would need to know to engage with me offline. And lastly, thank you for your time, your attention, and your consideration. This is The Point.